afternoon, everybody. My name is David Carney. I'm the Executive Director of the Career Industry Council of Australia. Welcome to the second of our webinars in our Green Careers and Sustainability Month series. Before we get underway today, I'd just like to make an acknowledgement of country. I'd just like to acknowledge that today I'm presenting this webinar from the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands on which we live and work, and to the traditional custodians of the lands and waters which we may visit upon for our work. I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present and extend that to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples who may be joining us in the webinar this afternoon. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get underway today, just to let you know that this session is being recorded. We have both the chat function and the Q&A function open. We would welcome your comments through in the chat. At the end of the presentation today from Mary and Lizzie, if there is an opportunity for time for questions, we would ask you please to enter those in the Q&A button. It just allows for greater facilitation for us. Excuse me. As I said, this is the second of 4 webinars in our Green Careers and Sustainability Month, which is being sponsored by Seeker. These events are all free, no charge to attend. Next week, we're welcoming from Switzerland, Professor Philip Gonen, who's going to be talking about skills for greener economies and societies, the potential of apprentices. And then we will wrap up the month with Professor Stuart Carr, who'll be talking about decent work, sustainable livelihoods and wellbeing. If you haven't yet registered for either of those 2 webinars and you would like to attend, as I said, there is no charge to attend. Please feel free to visit the events page on the Seeker website where you'll be provided information. So that's enough of the housekeeping. We're now I'd just like to introduce our 2 presenters today. First of all, Dr. Mary McMahon is an honorary professor at the University of Queensland in the School of Education. Mary is the developer and co-author of the Systems Theory Framework of Career Development. He researches and publishes on career development across the lifespan, narrative and systems approaches to career counselling and qualitative career assessment. And Mary is joined today, our co-presenter is Dr. Elizabeth Knight. Elizabeth is a senior research fellow at the Mitchell Institute and a senior lecturer at James Cook University. Her research focuses on the provision of career information, higher vocational education, transitions to tertiary education, and the nature of graduate employment and employability. I would like to let you know that today, both Lizzie and Mary, the session will be interactive and they will be using Mentimeter. So if you do have your mobile phone handy or a tablet that has access to a camera or your computer, just to give you some advance notice that there will be an opportunity for you to participate in that session. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to Lizzie. I think he's going to kick us off this afternoon. Thanks, Lizzie.
Thanks, David. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon, and a privilege as always to present with Mary McMahon. And we're just really excited to be part of this wonderful month of sessions. And today we're going to be talking about sustainability and what does it have to do with career development. And we hope we're going to have ample opportunity to think and talk about that. Just to let you know how we're going to run this webinar, we're going to have 2 main sections. The first section is going to talk about and consider issues about the context of sustainability, and Mary is going to lead on that section. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about what does sustainability mean for career development. And then Mary will finish us off. Throughout, we've got about 3 opportunities for you to become part of this discussion, because I think that's really what Mary and I want to do, is to help engender a discussion in the career industry in Australia. We just wanted to be really transparent about our thinking on sustainability. So we present for you these 5 kind of underpinning questions that really sort of frame our thinking and work on this issue of sustainability. We'll come back to these several times during the webinar just to orientate our discussions. But we're thinking about questions like, does it mean sustainability of career development? When we talk about sustainability, does it mean assisting clients to integrate sustainability into their career decision making? Does it mean preparing clients for careers that are sustainable? Does it mean integrating the sustainable development goals into career development work? And does it mean underpinning career development work with an ethic of sustainability? let's have a look and see what we think. I'm handing over now to Mary.
Thanks so much, Lizzie, and thanks, David, for the opportunity to present in this webinar series. I'm presenting to you today from the land of the Yugara and Turrbal people, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I thought I'd begin in this part of our webinar by talking about the global context, because as we know, in career development, some people are beginning to think about what they can do in terms of integrating the sustainability development goals into career programs and things. But what seems to be missing is a really big picture of the context in which we're setting any work that we do or any initiatives that we're taking with career development. So in terms of the global context, economic growth has been progressing pretty much unfettered for many decades. And that's led to depletion of natural resources. We've seen deforestation. There are concerns about what's happening in the Amazon. It's led to desertification in different places, etc. And as a result of all of that, there's rising inequality and poverty globally within and between countries. And that's been exacerbated, of course, by the COVID-19 pandemic. Throughout the world, there's entrenched gender inequality in most countries, and that's proving very challenging to deal with. And that's an equality issue around the world. And the environmental issues related to climate change, which has been called a climate crisis, are really putting significant pressure on the need to address sustainability. And all of that was happening regardless. And then COVID-19 impacted and just profoundly added to some of the existing problems. So that provides a little of the global context. And Lizzie's controlling our slides today, so I have to keep asking Lizzie to turn the slides. So basically, sustainability is becoming the issue of the present time. It's pretty unusual to hear a news report without hearing something about sustainability or renewable energy or the climate crisis. So we're hearing it every single day in our news feeds. Lizzie, can we move on, please? So what we'd like to do before we unpack what we think sustainability means and what the United Nations thinks it means and what it means for us in career development, we'd like to hear from you about what sustainability means to you. And so we'll go to the Mentimeter, and Lizzie will guide you through this little activity.
So hello everyone, and again, and hopefully many of you do have a second device or another screen on that you're watching us in the webinar. And so what you can do is you can either scan that QR code with your device, and I can see some of you are really hot off the mark and doing that now, or you can go to menti.com and use the code there, and I'll just pop that code into the chat as well. And David's done that, and I'm just going to pop it directly into the chat too. So hopefully you'll be able to all log on, and while you're logging in, hopefully you're thinking about that one word for you that does mean sustainability, what sustainability does mean for you. Oh, look at all those hearts, Mary. We're all getting our hearts started into gear, I can see.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so we're at a good number of people who've logged in, and just as people are starting, we'll move over to the word cloud, and hopefully you can start now by entering your single word. This time you've only got one word to enter, so just enter your word, and remember, if you see something that resonates with you, you can emphasize that word by typing it in. Oh, look, it's coming up there. I do love a word cloud, Mary.
Yes.
So we can see lots of different words that are coming up. Care really in the middle, and a lot of people are putting that in more than one times. Balance. What do you think, Mary? What can you see?
Yeah, we've got environment there. We've got continuation, long-lasting, survival, all important words. Longevity, things about the earth, the planet, the climate, ongoing, And I think you'll see as we go a bit further in our presentation that those words really resonate with what we're going to present a little bit further along. Maintenance, we've got long-term
I like
consumption.
thrive is there, Mary? That's lovely, isn't it?
Thrive, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And viable.
Yes, yeah, conserving.
And stewardship. The notion of stewardship, I think, is a nice idea.
Great.
So we might move on then.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for getting our thoughts moving about what we're actually focused on today. And so the word sustainable, as you've seen in that word cloud, is about existing constantly. It's about being able to keep going. And just in terms of the Macquarie Dictionary, they say that it's about having the capacity to continue operating perpetually by avoiding adverse effects on the natural environment and depletion of natural resources. So really thinking a little bit about the environment there. So if we move on to the next slide and think about, well, what does that mean? And what do the words that you put in the word cloud mean in terms of sustainable development? And so we can turn to the United Nations definition of sustainable development, which is probably the best and most authoritative one to use. And it's been around for quite a while. Basically, development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So it's about that stewardship that somebody mentioned, and it's about our legacy for the future. And it's not something, the idea of sustainable development is not something that bobbed up in the last 5 years or even the last 10 years. This definition was adopted actually in 1987 by the United Nations Brundtland Commission in a report that was commissioned then called Our Common Future. And basically right back then, the United Nations started to think about what is the impact of development on the world, on people, on the planet, on the environment for the future. And so that stimulated then what were called the Millennium Development Goals, which guided the work of many countries in the United Nations between 1990 and 2015. So next slide, Lizzie, please. Then in 2015, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals actually replaced the Millennium Development Goals. And you can see the SDGs here, and they're really far-reaching, and they're about more than just the environment. And they're about people, they're about the planet, they're about the infrastructure, and you can see that they're really broad. And in 2015, 193 countries signed on to that agenda, which meant that 193 countries committed to working towards the achievement of these 17 goals. And as part of that commitment, they also agreed to produce a voluntary national review of their progress at least twice over the lifetime of the agenda. So it was really about not just saying, oh yeah, these things are a good idea, but these things are a good idea, we're going to commit to them and we're going to report on our progress, which is really important. So moving on to the next slide then, basically the vision of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals is to transform the world to better meet human needs and the requirements of economic transformation. So it's not about saying economic development is bad. It's about saying, can we do it differently? Can we do it better? Can we do it in a way that will protect the environment, work towards peace, and realise human rights? And so at the core of the agenda really is that sustainability must become a reality for everybody. So there's acknowledgement that everybody has a role to play and that this impacts everybody. So if we move along again to the next slide, then these 17 development goals are, and within those goals, if you can imagine, there are targets. And so there are actually 169 targets that different countries around the world are working towards. And those goals and those 169 targets are committed to the betterment of 5 Ps: people, planet, prosperity, partnership, and peace. So all of these things are integrated, they're interrelated, and we can't work on one without having some impact on the other. And underpinning all of that is human rights and a commitment to achieving gender equality and empowerment for all women and girls, because around the world still, in this day and age, gender inequality is just ever present. And so these three goals are integrated and indivisible. And basically they're targeting economic development, social development, and environmental development. So they're really three core parts of the goals. And because of that emphasis on the social aspect and equality, the goals are really deeply rooted in social justice, trying to get a better world for people. And so social justice, as we know, is an underpinning value in our field. And so that means that we have this link to the sustainability goals through our social justice values. So Lizzie, if we go to the next one. So basically the United Nations Secretary General saw that this decade should be action on three levels: the global action, the leadership at international level through the United Nations to provide resources and solutions and help people work towards the goals, but local actions in countries around the world by putting in place the policies, putting in place the budgets, the regulatory frameworks that allow sustainability and sustainable development to be driven. So there's a role in that for national governments, state governments, and local authorities. And there's also a role for people, individuals, to do their bit. And just by thinking about how we dispose with waste, how we use electricity, how we use transport, we're thinking about and contributing to our own personal actions. So there's a role in this for career development as well on these three levels, but particularly at the people level. So we'll move along to the next slide. And basically that's reflected, those three levels are reflected in the 2018 review that was conducted by Australia. And they basically said that their review is a whole of Australia report. So it wasn't just them as the government. It wasn't just about government initiatives. It was about the efforts of the business sector, civil society, academia, communities, and individuals, everyone having a role to play. And they sort of identified how people were playing a role through the care economy, volunteering, preserving the natural environment, and just everyday activities like thinking about waste disposal, for example. So really the idea that there would be global, local, and people participation and contributing towards actions towards the achievement of the goals was reflected in this review. So next slide, please. And the United Nations actually does a progress report on the goals. And unfortunately, last year, they concluded that the Sustainable Development Agenda is in grave jeopardy due to multiple cascading and intersecting crises. And that's really bad news for the planet. It's really bad news for people. And it's just bad news in many ways, bad news for the environment. And the crises that they're referring to are COVID-19, which set back the achievement of many of the goals of the agenda, climate change, which is progressing, and conflict. And we know how, for example, the conflict in Ukraine has impacted supply chains, etc., throughout the world. And each of those has spin-off effects in terms of food and nutrition. And we know that the conflict in Ukraine affected the export of grain, which was going to African countries which are experiencing famine. We know that's impacted health, the environment. So all of these things are interacted. And so now the United Nations are saying that we really need a really concerted effort on a global scale to achieve these goals, because it's in danger of not achieving the goals. So if we move on, please, Lizzie. And if we want to think about that in a little more detail, we'll take the example of gender, which is one of the real focus areas of the sustainability goals. At the current rate of progress, the United Nations believes that to get rid of discriminatory laws and gaps in legal protection for women and girls, it's going to take another 286 years. And as a result of the COVID pandemic, schools and daycare centres closed in 2020, and that resulted in, they estimated, as 512 billion additional hours of unpaid childcare globally for women. And if we think in terms of women's employment, the glass ceiling that we've heard about for decades remains intact. Only 1 in every 3 managers or supervisors is a woman, and at the current pace of change, parity won't be achieved for another 140 years. Now, we could think that that's just about gender equality, but the way that these goals are interrelated, and if we go to the next slide, we'll see that gender equality actually impacts all of the other goals. And I've got 5 examples here on the screen for you. If we think about industry, innovation and infrastructure, SDG 9, in science, engineering and information communication technology jobs, only 2 in 10 are held by women, and only 16.5% of inventors who have a patent are women. If we think about partnerships and goals, and this is about, among other things, international aid, international development, there's been a backlash against women's rights in some country. And in terms of overseas development assistance that's bilateral and able to be spent on different programs, only 4.6% goes to programs where gender equality is the main objective. Women's labour force participation in 2022 is below pre-pandemic levels in 169 countries and areas. So that's the SDG 8. In terms of peace, justice and strong institutions, there's widespread recognition that we need women in leadership to bring a different perspective. And globally, only 42% of judicial positions are held by women, and 16% of police are women. And then the protracted conflicts and wars, and there have been renewed effort to keep girls out of schools that perpetuate gender equality, that then affects their opportunities in relation to employment, it affects their opportunities in relation to food security, etc. So these things are all interrelated. And you might think, well, maybe that's more in some countries than others. But if we go to the next slide, Lizzie, can we go to the next? We'll see with the example of Australia and gender in Australia. And you might think, well, Australia's done reasonably well, better than some countries in the COVID pandemic, but our gender pay gap is 22.8%, the same as 2021. And in fact, there's legislation going before Parliament this week to try to address that. On average, women are paid $26.6 thousand less than men, and men are twice as likely to be in the top income bracket as women. Fewer women work full-time than men. Only 1 in 5 boards have a gender balance, and fewer women are managers and in managerial appointments. And those figures come from the Australian Workplace Gender Equality Agency in 2022. So despite the fact that Australia, an OECD country, a developed country that's had equal opportunity legislation for many years, they concluded in 2022 that progress on gender equality in Australia has stalled. And if we think back to some of those figures that I gave you, those international figures that I gave you, women represent 43% of the judiciary in Australia, 16% of engineering graduates, and only 13% of the engineering workforce. So these are international problems. They're problems in most of our countries. So we can't just think, oh, that's going to be a problem for those countries over there, as these statistics show. So if we move on then, And I thought it was useful to use this definition, even though we've looked at a definition on sustainability from the University of California, Los Angeles Sustainability Committee, because it provides a really comprehensive approach, and it talks about the integration of environmental health, social equity, and economic vitality. So the environment, social equality, people, and the economy, in order to create thriving, healthy, diverse, and resilient communities for this generation and generations to come. So it's about the stewardship that someone mentioned before in the word cloud, to lead this world, to provide a legacy that we would be pleased for the next generation to inherit. But the important thing about this definition is that it recognises the interconnection, as I've just shown you, between these issues, and it requires a systems approach. There's not just one little area we can target, it's all linked up, so we have to understand it as a very complex system that's all interrelated. So if we move on to the next slide, the whole issue of sustainability and sustainable development is a really complex systems problem that will not be solved by simple or reductionist solutions. So it's not going to be solved by just reducing pollution or making sure we get more recycling. That will help, obviously that will help, but we need much more, and it won't be helped by siloed disciplines. Disciplines have to start talking to each other. So the engineers have to talk to the sustainability scientists, and have to talk to the social scientists about the impacts of development. So if we go on, Lizzie, please. So basically, the sustainability scientists say that systems thinking is an essential lens for approaching sustainability. We can do little bits, but we need to think that the little bits we do impact and ripple through the system. So we'll move on to the next slide. And systems thinking then is really about putting things into context and understanding the nature of their relationships. And we can only truly understand something if we understand the whole picture. And I think that that's important to remember. So if we move on to the next slide, systems thinking is a discipline that, as I said, for seeing wholes and parts and interrelationships, and it's about how things are interconnected and the systems thinking that we need to see those connections and develop systems responses to the issue of sustainable development and sustainability. So if we move on, and this shows, this is the therapeutic system, which is based on the systems theory framework of career development, which I'm not going to go into, but it shows the relationship between career development. So if we have the green circle in the middle, us as the career development practitioner, working with our clients in the context of their and our social systems, within the context of organisations that are profoundly impacted by the environmental societal system around us. So we know that where we work in terms of geographic location will impact the opportunities available to our clients, will impact the sorts of role models that they can see, the sort of education that's available to them. We know that the political decisions from our countries will impact what's available. We know that socioeconomic status is impacting as well. So we can see that we need to understand our role in this broader context. And where we are in the present is being based on what's happened in the past and what's happening now. And what we want to do now is work together to create a better future, a better legacy for the coming generations. So if we move on, then these are the questions, as Lizzie said, that are guiding our thinking in relation to career development. What does it mean? Does it mean sustainability of our field, integrating sustainability into career decision-making, preparing people for sustainable careers, integrating the SDGs in career development work, or having an ethic of sustainability? So if we move on then, These are the SDGs, and Lizzie and I have thought about, well, which ones apply specifically to career development that we could target first, and you might have some thoughts about that as well. So if we go on to the next slide, we've marked with stars the ones that we think directly we can contribute directly to. So for example, quality education, gender equality. And we know that if we contribute to a young person continuing their learning and work, that they will have better access to work and employment. It may reduce their chances to experience poverty. It may enhance their health and well-being and give them more chances of a decent job. And if we do that with our young women, we might actually improve gender equality. And these spin-offs from fostering quality education can also have spin-offs on SDGs that we haven't highlighted there with a star, such as zero hunger, for example. So if we move on. So these are the SDGs that Lizzie and I have thought, you know, are really more directly related to career development, but because of the interrelationships between them, if we work on these, they will have impact and ripple effects elsewhere. So we'll move on to the next slide, and I'll hand over to Lizzie.
Thanks so much, Mary, for that really comprehensive kind of background and context of sustainability. Mary and I have been talking through the pandemic, and to draw on a favourite of ours, Mike Ryan from the WHO, there is a sort of need for us to do it all and do it now. It is an emergency, and as we can see, we are behind. But I think as career development practitioners, we need to see that there are things we can do, and there is work going on, and we're joining our voices with many others who are working in this area. And the conversations have been going on for some time. We know Peter Plant, who spoke last week, has been talking about this for a long time, and there are many other very notable thinkers in career development who've been talking about this. We've been thinking about the inclusion of a psychological perspective, how we feel, and we know that there's anxiety about the future and sustainability, and we have put up some references which are available at the end of who've been talking about that. We think there is a paradigm shift, as Peter Plant says, towards green guidance, ethics and practice. We need to think about, as Van der Heijden says, about sustainable careers. We're thinking, and we'll look at the moment in three different examples where Laura Nota has thought about practical applications, and then Scott Solberg and colleagues have looked at using the SDGs in a program logic of developing that. And so I think that what we're going to say is we do need to do it all and do it now, but we can do it bit by bit, and we can do it together. So I think the first sort of project and body of work we wanted to highlight is this project Stay Inclusive, Sustainable, Curious, Cosmopolitan and Aspirant, which I think is such a hopeful orientation. And I think we do have to think about the holistic, integral, cosmopolitan view. And I think it really resonates with our field and the underpinning values, as Mary says, of social justice and work in our field. We need to think about our career counselling activities, making young people aware of the fact that they are agents of change, and making sure that we have emancipatory kind of goals together. So that's a very interesting body of work you might want to look into. And also we're very thankful of Scott Solberg and his colleagues the year before last looked at this program design focus, looking at how we can increase educational attainment, improve career and workforce development with an intended outcome, explicitly to increase access to decent work with the impact. And this really helps us link in those SDGs as Mary highlighted. So we do think we can apply systems thinking, and I think the period of the pandemic and also other different crises that have come up have really made transparent how we are part of an interconnected world. And we do need to encourage all relevant stakeholders, including people, students and people we work with, that we have to also be tolerant of different voices and different viewpoints and work together to gain consensus and try and ensure, spoke here before the COVID, that this is important, and it remains very important now. But we know you're doing this. We know we're all, many of us thinking, and we're very grateful for all of you attending. And we just wanted to hear from you. very briefly, and using Menti, and so remember you've got your second device. We wanted to hear about how you currently integrate sustainability into your practice. And because we wanted a word cloud, we've again asked you to please be quite brief and sort of put in a couple of words, but you can post more than once. How do you currently have a think about how you currently integrate sustainability into your career practice, into your life practice? And recycling is a really important part. And so please do put that in. And I'm just going to type the code in again for anyone who's looking there. Increasing awareness, creativity, minimize water use. Mary, tell us what you see as well.
Hey, yeah, I think creativity is really important, because we do have to think of new ways of working potentially, and new ideas for bringing this into our practice.
I really like that comment there, and Mary, stop, think, reflect. And we're going to talk about that in a bit, about experiential learning and reflecting on our action, and education. I can see people are adding that and putting it together, showing kindness. That's lovely. Well-being. And we can see in the Treasurer's recent publication about a values-led economy as well.
We can see there no paper-based assessments, so very practical things that people can do as well.
And that career is more than just a job. I think, Mary, you wrote about that some time ago in a very famous publication, didn't you?
Yes.
Valuing student voices, and I think that's really critical, and they are the future to come as well. Oh, students can be of every age, I suppose, as well. But challenging assumptions, that's lovely. I think this design thinking, consuming less, and I'm really taken with that stop, think, reflect. And I didn't enter it myself, I promise. You can cheat on these things, can't you, Mary? But I didn't. Brilliant. Paperless, second-hand clothing. Very good. I'm enjoying this, everybody coming together and sharing how you're working now.
And there's one there about advocating for equity, and we need to think about our role as practitioners, and about that we may need to become advocates in some areas for the work that we do. So we may need to think about a broader role for ourselves than the one that we've traditionally had.
I like their empathy, which is, I think that's a really important part of how we think about the world and how we think about our practice. And looking at the effects of change, well, that's what we do as career development practitioners as well.
There's a nice idea there about a Green Career Expo as well, another nice practical idea. And the one there about it's about we, not me. And I think that's what's coming through in what I've presented so far, that this is not just one person, this is affecting everybody. It's an issue for everybody.
That's a great slogan, I think. Very good headline writer there. Fantastic. Leading by example, I think that's really useful. Talking about the SDGs and really thinking about how it means to each other. I see that too. Fantastic. And empowering clients. I just saw Zoom pass and empowering women. Very good. All right. Well, I think that's a beautiful word cloud that we've created together. We just so lovely to have this conversation. And so let's talk about some of the ideas that we've gathered from around the world and around Australia about how other people and how we can integrate sustainability into our practice. Going back to these questions and thinking about these questions has been really useful. Part of a project that I was working on, I've been working on at the Mitchell Institute, about thinking about net zero. What does career development look like in a net zero economy, and what will we be needing to do when we're thinking about that kind of work? And we sort of combined that with looking around the world to see some key ideas and key concepts. And we're going to present them in different domains of career guidance and career development. So on the first one, we're thinking about is career education, a core of our discipline, and thinking about we need to take a capabilities approach, and that draws on sort of international development literature and Amartya Sen sort of ideas, and emphasize the changing nature of careers, but the normality of that, and sort of have a really explicit attention to supporting holistic citizenry. And I think that that's really good concepts to underpin our career education now and into the future. We think when we're presenting career education, understanding and explicitly thinking about our place within systems and how we apply systems thinking, both with concepts of career development and also sustainability, can really help you, as we show with our image, put those jigsaw puzzle together and put the pieces together of how we can conceptualize solutions for individuals and also together. We draw on UNESCO wrote a very interesting piece about having different perspectives of sustainability, and it really just shows us how much we can draw on different geographic, human rights, gender equality, values, sustainability perspectives to really get a rich and thick descriptions about how career education and sustainability can be woven together. And further, in the same publication from UNESCO in 2012, they talked about how you can do that. What teaching and learning techniques can we use? And we can use problem-based learning. We can formulate questions. We can facilitate discussions. And really, and we're sort of drawing now on the Australian blueprint as well, thinking about experiential learning to be an experience and to reflect on our world and reflect on where we are is a really critical part. Drilling down a little bit further, taking those dimensions of sustainability on that left-hand side, that column, we look at then some of the performance indicators that inform the competencies in the refreshed Australian blueprint of career development. Looking at locating and evaluate a range of career information can help us understand our environment, societal needs and economic conditions can help us understand the world of work. And then looking at society, we can think about and discover how work contributes to individuals' lives, non-traditional life and work options to explore and to break apart, challenge assumptions of stereotypical thinking. We also want to develop abilities to apply strategies to promote well-being, and we note in the ABCD that we have a 12th competency that really pays explicit attention to well-being. And in terms of culture and that dimension of sustainability, building positive and effective relationships in life and work are important throughout times of VUCA kind of changes and different times of crisis. Seeking explicitly to eliminate and to notice gender bias, stereotypes and inequality is important, and examining factors that respond to stereotypical thinking and can be challenged. And in terms of the economy, thinking about the economy in a variety of ways, and a values-led economy, contributing the work to the community and your understanding of changing economic conditions, and develop that in your career planning, which is a critical part of what we're exhorting everyone to do to meet the challenge of sustainability. Peter Plant sort of said only a couple of years ago that that you have to think beyond the individual, think about the implications of the individual and how they're linked to wider societal values. And in a blog, Maggi, writing from Italy, talked about a project where they were thinking about students learning about the careers in their own interest, but thinking about planetary health, a lovely concept that we maybe can talk about later, and thinking about how different individual choices can contribute to make the planet healthier. And drawing back and sort of concluding this section on the UNESCO perspectives, the aim would be that students will begin to understand complexity and to work with complexity. And we note that is really a core understanding of managing careers and working on what we like to understand of developing career management competencies. Thinking again about career information, another domain of our practice, to explore the time-boundedness of information, both in individuals' lives, but also in the labour market and economy is really important. The future changes that a net zero economy may bring, and we don't know, and there are benefits and exciting new opportunities that will emerge from a net zero emissions future. We noted last week that Peter Plant talked about the information site based in the US, Career One Stop, that has a real focus on green careers, so we recommend that as a resource to you too. When we're thinking about and talking about career information in terms of sustainability in the world of work, we do think that it is useful to include explicitly sustainability in discussions when we're exploring occupational information, industry and job role discussions, to talk about systems thinking and supply chain issues and what during the pandemic you couldn't get, or due to the conflict in Ukraine, what was happening, things like that. Supply chains have become more transparent due to the disruption that we've all experienced and over the last 3 years. So perhaps we can talk then explicitly about systems and how we are all part of different kind of systems. We think it's also important to reflect on our career development qualifications, both the continuing and initial qualification, to explicitly incorporate future implications of the net zero economy and feeling confidence. And I think that's something that Mary and I are really keen that everyone can be part of this discussion, and everyone should feel empowered to be part of this. And it's not for one particular viewpoint, but explicitly in professional development qualifications and in our learning, we should be able to think about that, think about the ethics of emancipatory practice and our foundational underpinnings in career development of social justice. Cohen Scarley write about, supporting individuals to build the society of tomorrow. We require the implementation of the individual as well as collective interventions, which will focus on creativity and collaboration. And I think that that's a very good summary of the sustainability of what and systems thinking view of what we can do and we can offer as career practitioners. I'm just going to hand over to Mary to say where to from here. Solve it all for us, Mary. No.
Well, if only. But basically, when we think about the progress report, the 2022 progress report of the United Nations that said that the achievement of the SDGs is in jeopardy, really, and in the words of Mike Ryan, that we need to do it all and do it now. To wait or do nothing are not options. So we need to think, what we can do in our role as individuals, in our role as career practitioners. And we need to think that, well, as a career practitioner, I may be able to influence others, but that those others will in turn influence somebody else. So when we're thinking about career decisions, for example, we've tended to focus in career development on what the best job is for me, what the best course is for me. What we would be asking individuals to think about now would be, if I make this decision, what are the implications for me? What are the implications for people around me? What is the implication for the environment? What's the implications for the future? So if we start thinking about that we rather than I, that somebody mentioned in the earlier word cloud, I think that's a really useful way of starting to think, what are the implications for the decisions that I make now in terms of the economy, in terms of the environment, and in terms of the people around me and the people of the future? So career development really does have a contribution to make, because remember, the United Nations says contributions can be at global, local, and people levels. So career development does have a contribution to make. And Lizzie's just shown you a lot of ways of how people are already making a contribution, or things that we could embed into our practice. So we'll move to the next slide and think about, well, what will you do next when you leave this webinar? What is something that you can do in your practice? And we're going again to Mentimeter for the last time to see what ideas you've got about what you'll do next to, I guess, embed or address sustainability development goals in your work. So I think you've got the link there to Mentimeter at the top of the screen.
And I'll put the code back in the chat for those who would like to copy it.
So again, just a short response, a couple of words.
Support, very good.
Support, yes. Support for others, that feeds into our social justice. Contact colleagues. Yes, we can review learning materials. We can see how we can, if we're using the Australian Blueprint for Career Development, for example, where career development can be implemented in using that. Encourage a we attitude. Yes.
I like that.
The participatory approach. Yes, all of those strategies for career education were about participation. So us stepping back from the role of expert and becoming a facilitator and helping people engage with these issues and start thinking about, it's not just about me, what are the broader implications? So asking new questions. And I think the idea of working with other disciplines and other modalities enables us to ask different questions.
I like that persevere, Mary. That's coming up a lot, and I think that that's really useful. And I think it's really important people not to find it too much. Everyone can do something.
Yes.
Yeah, think beyond me. And gets focus on values. That's very useful and really has longevity focusing on values there.
Yes.
Encourage change is coming up. People are emphasizing that, and all of you can enhance different words that you'd like to vote up and grow bigger. If you see something you like, you can add it again. Practice more laterally. That's an interesting word, isn't it, Mary? I like that.
Yes, it's thinking outside the box and reviewing what we do and thinking about how we could change it, how we could incorporate something on sustainable development or the SDGs. And someone said there, be careful of language. And I think we need to be think positively about when we're working with young people, particularly the contribution that they can make, so that we can foster in their commitment to working on these things.
Because it can be very bleak, and I think that was really interesting, that work on the psychological perspectives, and climate anxiety and things is coming up as a new kind of thing that we need to think about and talk about in our practice.
Yes. So that's some good ideas there. So we might thank you for that. I think that it's nice to see that people have got some good ideas and can go away from the webinar with some actual concrete things that they can do. And hopefully some of your suggestions you've put there will provide ideas for others in the webinar today. So we'll just move on and conclude our webinar. But basically, Monbiot says environmental issues and sustainability concerns know no boundaries. And I think, as your ideas just suggested then, that you can see that how, thinking from a systems perspective, we can see how everything is interrelated. So if we make a change, it will have impact somewhere else, which is important to realise. So let's move on to the next slide. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you for attending. I hope you've taken something away that you can incorporate into your practice, and we're happy to take any questions for the next few minutes.
Thanks, Lizzie, and thanks, Mary. Just while people are thinking about any questions, the Q&A function has been activated, so you can put your questions into Q&A, and there are some starting to come through in the chat as well. So just while people are having a think about that, thanks, Lizzie and Mary, for what was really a comprehensive walkthrough and the link for career development and career practitioners. I think, Lizzie, you sort of said as well, I think the really important thing for attendees is not to feel completely overwhelmed by because a lot of the presentations, there is actually a real problem which we need to start to address. And I think it probably is the same types of things when people start thinking about our environmental issues that we need to address as well. Sometimes we sort of think, look, they're just too big for me as an individual to try and deal with. And it was really encouraging, I think, in those sort of that word cloud at the end there, where people were talking about, talk to colleagues, build a team, work collaboratively. I think, that takes away that sort of daunting nature, I think, of what am I supposed to do just as an individual career practitioner. I suppose one question I would pose to you before we get to the Q&A, which was posed last week as well, which I thought was an interesting one, and Peter answered it. I'd be interested to hear your views on it as well. Somebody asked us last week, as a career practitioner, obviously you, you know, we're taught in our training that we're non-biased. We don't provide specific information about certain career paths for individuals. But yet this rise of sort of green careers and sustainability is encouraging us to obviously think in those ways. How do we juggle that role of our own views about the need to think in a more sustainable green career sustainability way about work and employment and living, and actually maintaining our sort of impartial, non-biased view that a career practitioner needs to do?
You start, Mary.
I guess we are supposed to be impartial, but if we act as a facilitator of a process, of an experiential learning process, or some sort of collaborative learning process, or problem-based learning, that will enable learners to identify the issues for themselves. If we facilitate a process where they're thinking about perhaps supply chains and the implications of products that they buy, for example, if we facilitate a process of getting young people to think, well, what are the implications for this job on other people, on the environment, etc. We're not imposing our view. They're kind of seeking the information, they're engaged in discussion, and they're coming up with their own conclusions. So I think we do have to avoid sort of coming on with our own opinions, and we've always had to do that with career information and career guidance or career advice or whatever we call it. But that facilitative role enables us to step back from our own opinion and allow others to discover for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's right, Mary, and I think that I really liked in the last word cloud, sort of building allies and also drawing sort of resonance and well-being as practitioners from each other. We don't have to bring our ideologies into practice, but we do have to notice and be aware of what's happening in the economy and the labour market and the climate. And I think it's really important that we do take that neutral stance, but we do have a foundation of social justice that we are working for, and making clear that people can manage their own careers.
And I think we need to think in terms of the organisations we work with, and I notice that some of you work for universities, and you know, some of your work for large corporates, etc., and education authorities. Those organisations are actually beginning to think through sustainability for themselves, and so really they're putting a message to the people in those organisations. For example, a colleague of mine in a country overseas, their university is actually looking at the travel of staff and whether travel is needed or whether they can just participate via Zoom or whatever. So the fact that it's not just us, we're not the lone voice in the wilderness. Many of the organisations that we're working for are striving. I know my own university is striving to be sustainable, and to it has a whole solar farm, for example, that it manages. So it's not just us doing this. Our organisations are also pushing through a message through the actions they're taking.
Okay, so Mary and Lizzie, there's two questions in the Q&A. The first one talks about any national careers events that are having a sustainability focus. I'm not aware of any myself personally. I don't know if either of you. This month. Apart from Seekers Month, yes, and also there will be an increased focus during National Careers Week this year on green careers and sustainability. But the actual career expos and so forth, I'm not aware of any. We might, just with a minute to go, if one of you would like to pick up Annie's question, if you can see that.
Yeah, and so that was about inspiring SDGs. And I think there's also issues about whether we need to make explicit the SDGs, or we just weave it into our own career education, our career practice, and attention to the whole system. And as Mary says, thinking about supply chain. What do you think, Mary? Conversations, are they easy to have, people in positions of privilege?
I can't see the question for some reason, but yeah, I think these conversations are easy to have. And if we step back as career practitioners, if we step back and take a facilitative role, then I think we facilitate a conversation with others. And the other thing that I think is important is that we often think about career learning in schools and universities and in workplaces, but we need to think about starting young, with very young children. And the example of Laura Noter and her colleagues was actually with young children. So I think it's really important to start young, and children will be able to take on board some of the ideas.
Well, thank you, Mary. Thank you, Lizzie. I'm cognizant of the fact that it's pushing on 6 o'clock on the Eastern Seaboard, so we don't want to be eating into anyone's evening mealtime or also their life-work balance. So we will start to draw it to a close. As I said, thank you very much for a really informative and thought-provoking webinar. Thanks for incorporating some interactivity. I know our attendees always enjoy a bit of interactivity, and thank you to those people that got involved and attended. Thanks also, I just put in the chat, but thanks also to our international colleagues that joined us today. It was great to see so many people online from other parts of the world, and special thanks to those that got up very early to join us. It's always nice to see you as well. So as I said, this is the second, we're halfway through our month. We've got 2 more webinars to go. If you're interested in either of those, please feel free to visit the SEEK website, click on the events tab where you can register. But as I said, Lizzie and Mary, thank you very much for your presentation. It's been great. And thanks everybody for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.